Welcome to the charteroakchessclub's YouTube channel. In today's video, we'll be going over a game played by grandmaster Akiba Rubinstein. Enjoy. So the game started out with pawn to d4, pawn to d5, knight to f3, pawn to c5, e3, knight to f6, pawn takes pawn, and then the queen came to a5 to play check, which gets a fork and picks the pawn back up. This is not the best way to do it, though. I want to say it's a mistake, but a much better way to play is to play pawn to e6. And that way you keep two pawns in the center, and your bishop is going to be the one to recapture his pawn, which is a bit more natural than bringing the queen out too early in the game. Plus, you get closer to castling. So if white tries to hold on to this pawn by playing b4, black should be prepared to still win this pawn back by playing pawn to a5, breaking down the pawn chain. Note that white can't defend with a3, because black can still take because there's a pin on the rook. So instead, pawn to c3, capture, capture, and now it looks like white's winning here still, but black can continue to break down the pawn chain with b6. If white defends with the bishop now, capture, capture, and then we're going to give up the rook for the bishop. But that's because when the knight takes back, we get the same fork, except we're no longer going after the pawn, we're going after the knight. And so after this position, black would have the knight and the bishop for the rook and the pawn, but they're also going to be able to capture his pawn back. They have their two pawns in the center, they're more developed, they're going to castle. It's just a much better position for black to be in. So that's all to say that queen to a5 is not necessary. It looks like you're winning the pawn right back, but if you know your stuff, e6 is going to be totally fine. So queen to a5 was played, and Rubinstein decides after his queen takes back, I'm going to go after the queen with pawn to a3, threatening to play b4, attacking the queen, and developing the bishop. His opponent sees that, he moves queen to c7, and we have c4. And now, this is a bit more of a mistake. Why are we taking the pawn in c4 when we could play pawn to e6? If we do this, if white decides to capture, we each still have a pawn in the center. We can move our bishop to defend, get the bishops out, get the knight out, castle kingside. Very easy game. But instead, when black captures a pawn, he allows white to develop another piece naturally. We can move the bishop, and we can move the knight. Rubinstein decided to move the knight. Bishop comes out to pin, b4, knight to c6, bishop to b2, and in this position, black decided, I'm going to get rid of this knight by playing pawn to b5. And this is where things get really crazy. Pause the video and try to figure out Rubinstein's plan here as white. So in the game, Rubinstein found knight to e5, and when black decided to recapture, instead of taking with the bishop, Rubinstein decided to take with the knight. And this position is crazy because right now the material is even, but black can take the queen. And that's exactly what his opponent did. And even though his opponent is up 9 points, white is slightly better in this game. So white played bishop takes on b5 check. And his opponent decided to defend with knight to d7. But let's look at what happens if the king goes to d8. So if the king goes to d8, getting a fork really isn't worth it because we're only going to pick up 5 points, and we're going to probably trap our knight in, and we are currently down 8 points. So instead, we're going to go after the king. So we're going to bring our rook and play check, and the king has to run to the side. And now again, we play check with the bishop, and the king has to run to the side. And we're going to sacrifice this knight by playing knight to c6, because the king cannot move now. So the queen takes. And now we bring in the bishop, and we get this kind of Boden's mate going on. And so the queen's going to have to defend. If they play queen to c7, we have checkmate right away, because that queen is pinned to the king. And instead, if they go here, we don't even bother capturing the queen. Instead, we're going to play rook to c1, and black can choose how they get checkmated in one move now. They can play rook to c8. They can decide to block that, and then we play bishop to c7. And they can't really try anything else because there's no way to either block or defend the rook from coming to c8. So all of those crazy checkmate ideas Rubinstein had to see from this position, which is pretty crazy. But he went for it, And after knight to d7, we had bishop takes. And in the game, his opponent played the best move, just give back the queen. What if we don't go for that, though? What if we try to hold on with king to d8? Well, now, again, we're going to play rook takes on d1, and there's a lot of bad things happening here. If black's not careful, then the knight can come and check the king, and the king has nowhere to go, so it's checkmate. If they try to, create an escape route for the king, white always has this move of discover check and picking up the rook, so they're going to win there too. So there's nothing that black can really play here. So giving up the queen is the best move. And after the dust settles, black decides to keep their bishop, and Rubinstein has won a pawn. They have 2 pawns against 1 pawn. So now, what would you play here as Rubinstein? Will you say, well, I think I have enough to win this game, even though I just have a pawn, so I want to make everything really simple. I want to trade up all the pieces off the board. So his opponent brings out the rook, and Rubinstein decides to play pawn to g4. I really like this move. You attack the bishop, and no matter where the bishop goes, we get an opportunity to trade it off. And that's exactly what they did. Black could have also tried to play f6, but that wouldn't have been as good because they'd lose a pawn as well. So we'd have take, take, and then take. So black plays bishop to g6. We take the bishop. And now it makes sense to take with the h-pawn because at least your rook gets a little active here as black. So that's exactly what happens. And what would you play here as white? Okay, so white finds a fun move. Bishop to d4. Attacking the pawn and also getting your bishop to a more active square where you can attack on both sides of the board. And then his king comes to d2, and that helps prevent the rook from coming to the c2 square. His opponent plays f6, which does 2 things. He needs to get his bishop out so that I can start playing some chess here. And you can't really move the bishop while your g-pawn is undefended. So playing f6 defends the g-pawn and also sets up pawn to e5 to kick the bishop away. And we have rook to c1. Of course, we have to fight for that open file. And when the rook takes, we have 2 ways to capture. And which way would you capture? Would you capture with the king? Would you capture with the rook? Rubinstein decides to capture with the rook. And what's really fun about this is it seems that we have to capture with the king in order to protect this pawn. But our king is more active on d2. And we're going to get an open file by doing this that we really don't mind if we lose this pawn. If we lose the pawn, we can simply check the king, and then the king can move over here, and we can go after this pawn on a6 and just win it right back. So there's really no problem with losing that pawn on h2. So we have pawn to e5 attacking the bishop, and bishop goes here, and again, forcing a trade. That bishop has nowhere to go. They have to trade. So we have rook takes, and then we have bishop takes, and note that they can't play rook takes on f2 because the king would attack the rook, and then we have time to save the bishop when they defend the rook. So king takes, now we defend the pawn, and it's even material here, but white is better because we have 4 pawns against 3 pawns, but the king is here ready to help out. And it's 2 against 1, but this rook is going to be able to get to that pawn before their rook is able to defend. So they move the pawn to stop the king from moving. Rubinstein goes after the free pawn. And I really like this game because technically it's even material. And obviously with 2 pawns you're going to win. But Rubinstein finds a very neat, clear-cut way to win here. And he makes it seem very effortless. His first move here, rook to a7. We went over this in the Capablanca game. Cut off the king from coming into the game. It's going to make our job a lot easier. Rook comes over here, trying to get behind the pawns and take one of them off the board. Defending the pawn. And now the rook goes to a1. And the best move is rook to a7 because you can hold on to both pawns if you want. But you really don't need to. So Rubinstein decides to play pawn to b6 and just give up the pawn. But that's because in this position, white wins. So try to figure out the winning idea for white here. So the easiest is rook to a7. And if the rook takes, the pawn will capture back and promote. If the rook goes after this pawn, which is what they tried in the game, because they've cut off the king, they're able to play pawn to b7, and the game is over. So if the king tries to move, we have check, and we have this discovered attack on the king, and we're also attacking the rook. So the king cannot come into the game. If the rook takes, they're going to lose the rook, and if they do nothing, which is what they did, they played pawn to g4. Now we have rook to a8 check, king has to move up, we get the queen, and now white is simply winning. So they played a few more moves, I don't know why, and black resigned. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to get new chess content every week. Have you played a great game of chess recently? Feel free to email it to us and we'll go through it during our next video.